And good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner, and thank you to the Eastchester Library and to Tracy and Kate for inviting me. My name, again, is Evan Weiner, and we may get off to a little bit of a sluggish start because people are coming in, and I have to let them in as well. So hopefully everybody is in, and we're ready to go. Um, as I told some people prior to starting this, this was an assignment that I got to do this talk from the Chester, New Jersey Library. Donella Theory is the woman's name. I was doing a thing called The Early Days of TV, the last couple of minutes about Lucy, not the I Love Lucy show, but I Love Lucy, or rather Lucille Ball, the powerful business executive in Hollywood, the most powerful business executive in Hollywood at the time. This is a woman who should never have been where she was. This was a woman who faced a lot of rejection over the years and basically should never have made it, except she did. And she made it bigger than anybody else in the television industry in terms of women participation in television. Lucille Ball was born in Jamestown, New York on August 6, 1911. Her father, a telephone lineman, died of typhoid fever in 1915, and that left Lucille, a sibling, her mother Desiree, along with Desiree's father and mother, Fred and Flora Bell Hunt, to raise this family in southwestern New York, out toward the Pennsylvania and Ohio border. Lucy didn't particularly like small town living. By the time she's 17, she gets out of Jamestown. Her grandfather would get her in trouble in 1936 and almost toppled her career. At 17, in 1928, she left upstate New York and high school for Broadway. And she's figuring, hey, I'm going to hear the roar of the grease paint and I'm going to trip that light fantastic and everybody is going to love me. But she had to go to acting school. And she found out in acting school that, well, everybody didn't love her. In fact, the people who were running the acting school didn't love her at all. They liked Betty Davis. She was a classmate. And they basically said, hey, Lucy, you just don't have it. You don't have it. Just go home. Jamestown's a nice place. I'm sure you'll do well in Jamestown, but she wasn't going to have any of that. Lucy would come up with the idea for Desilu about 2 decades after being rejected and rejected and rejected. And life without Desi at Desilu, well, Lucy becomes the mother of Star Trek. Desilu Production in association with Norway Corporation. The executive. This is prior to Betty Friedan's book coming out called The Feminine Mystique. This is prior to Gloria Steinem going undercover to see what the life of a Playboy bunny was. This was before Bernice Sadler, who was one of the women who was pushing for Title IX. Before any of these people, Bella Abzug, she was the most powerful businesswoman in the United States. And she had no background. There was no MBA from Stanford, no MBA from Wharton or Yale or Harvard. It's a school of hard knocks. In 1962, she buys out Desi Arnaz to have complete control of the company. She's the first woman to own a major studio. 3 of her shows would go on to become, from television into the movies, successful movie franchises. And there's Lucy. She's about 18 years old in this picture. She was a model. And she was a model for Chesterfield cigarettes in the ads. She also did nude modeling, and to make some money, well, she did some prostitution on the side, which was not unusual for actors or actresses at that point. Frank Sinatra did a porno movie in 1934. She's in New York and she washes out. She also gets rheumatoid arthritis along the way, which is a very tough disease. My wife has it as well. It affects the hands and the feet, which makes her skill on film or on television even more astounding. Lucy goes to Hollywood as a Goldwyn girl in 1933. She's 21, 22 years old. And being Goldwyn girl was really no big deal. There were a lot of Goldwyn girls who were just an extra in the movie. And she did get a part in a movie called Roman Scandals, which starred Eddie Cantor, who was at the height of his fame at that point. Joe Franklin. Remember Joe Franklin from Channel 9? Well, Joe Franklin's favorite performer was Eddie Cantor. So Eddie is at the top of his game at that point, making Whoopi had just come out and other things that he was doing. But yeah, she really doesn't impress anybody in that movie. And she's out the door again, and she decides, well, I'm going to become a stunt girl because I want to make it in Hollywood. Now, that woman there is a woman by the name of Aretha Thompson. She, let's say, had a very special relationship with Humphrey Bogart for about 20 years while he was married to Lauren Bacall. And you could see Verita in her Coco Chanel outfit with my wife. This is in 2007. And she had been a runner-up Miss Arizona in 1936, 37, somewhere along that time. And she also became a stunt girl about 4 or 5 years after Lucy did. And I said, what do you do as a stunt girl to Verita one day? And she said, well, you fall off horses. You jump out of burning buildings. You roll in the dirt. You risk your body. Verita lasted 1 year as a stunt girl and then went on to other things in Hollywood, becoming a hairdresser. And she became a very successful restaurateur in Southern California and had residences on Ocean Avenue in Santa Monica and in the French Quarter in New Orleans. Doctors diagnosed Lucy with rheumatoid arthritis when she was 17 years old in 1928. She really didn't do all that much in New York because of that. And that made her slapstick comedy with pratfalls much more difficult, along with being a stunt girl. The first person ever to have any kind of interest in Lucy's ability was Buster Keaton, the silent film star. And he ended up in TV roughly at the same time Lucy was on TV in the 1950s. He had an eye for her talent, and he saw some comedic promise in Lucy and helped her hone some timing and the ability to use props for laughs. He even showed her how to perform physical comedy without getting hurt. He recommended her to Harry Cohn over at Columbia Pictures, which produced the Three Stooges. Harry, I got a girl for you. Oh, what do you want, Buster? I got this girl. She's great. She'll fit in well at Columbia University. Columbia Pictures. She is going to be great. And Harry says, "Oh, okay. Look, Buster," and trying to get him off the phone. Okay, I'll take a look. I'll take a look. And they do, and they throw her into a movie with these guys, Curly, Moe, and Larry. And you can see she towers over the Horowitz brothers and Larry Fine over there. And that's her first real role in Hollywood with the Three Stooges. It's the movie called, or the shorts, there were two reelers, there were shorts, part of that Saturday morning combination that you got cartoons and newsreels and sports reels and other entertainment forums and also the movies. So she's in the short film serial called Three Little Pigskins with the Three Stooges. And that's where she learned that and that and that and pies in the face and all that other stuff. Lucy always credited the Stooges with introducing her to slapstick and physical comedy. But Columbia dropped Lucy because the studio boss, Harry Cohn, didn't think she had any talent. Well, she's bouncing around Hollywood and bouncing around Hollywood, and next stop, RKO, Stage Door, with Ginger Rogers. Now, she befriends Ginger Rogers' mother, who apparently was kind of a den mother to all of these starlets, except Lucy, by this point, isn't exactly a starlet. She's about 26 years old. Starlets are 18, 19, and 20 years old. But she gives Lucy some advice. Sleep with the boss. Same advice she gave her daughter Ginger and others. Sleep with the boss. And it has been said that Lucy, slept with the bosses, but didn't have big enough breasts to attract attention to be a star. At least that's what she said in her biography. In 1937, though, Gregory LaCava cast a brown-haired Lucy to play Ginger Rogers' dance partner in Stage Door, which starred Katharine Hepburn, Ann Miller, and Eve Arden. The movie was RKO's big effort for the year, and it was a hit at the box office, except it does nothing for Lucy. Next up, well, the Marx Brothers, Groucho, Chico, and Harpo, and Lucy. She's in a movie called Room Service, which is not up there with Duck Soup or Horse Feathers, which are my two favorite Marx Brothers movies, being that I'm in radio and TV and newspapers and do something called the politics of sports business. I like Horse Feathers because it lampoons college sports in 1932. Nothing much has changed since 1932. Anyway, so she's in this movie, Room Service, which is not really one of the great Marx Brothers movies. It's down on the other end of the totem pole. And okay, so she's in the movie. That's about it. Tell them Groucho sent you. Didn't do much for her career. But she becomes the queen of the B picture. She takes everything available that comes her way, whether it's in the movies or whether it's on radio. And she struggled for many years in Hollywood. During the early years of her career, she appeared in everything from hard-boiled drama films to romantic comedies throughout the 30s and 40s. And she gets this nickname, Queen of the B Pictures, which I'm not sure was all that complimentary, but at least she gets that nickname. Things would change, though, in 1940. She's 29, and she meets this 23-year-old Cuban exile by the name of Desi Arnaz. Now, I don't know if you know much about Desi's background, but it's a rather interesting background. In 1933, the Arnaz family is thrown out of Cuba. Desi's father was a politician, and he came from money. He came from a lot of money in Cuba, including the rum company that went there and was closed down by Castro, but that was years later. But 1933, there's something called the Sergeant's Revolt. And Fulgencio Batista, who became the dictator in the 1950s of Cuba. This is the Sergeant's Revolt. He leads it. And the Arnaz family is on the wrong side of the revolt. It's a coup. And they flee with nothing but the shirts on their back. He ends up in Miami. Would go to the University, I believe, of St. Leo over in Tampa, but he's also a singer and kind of a band leader, a little band leader, and an actor. And Xavier Cugat discovers him, and the rest is history. He goes to Broadway in 1939 and is in a show, and he's out in LA in 1940 doing movies, including one called Too Many Girls, which he was in the play version of that in New York on Broadway. In 1940, the film Dance Girl Dance, Lucy plays the role of Bubbles and gets some critical notice finally. And she's in Too Many Girls with Desi, which was on TCM recently. It is really a silly, silly movie. It's laughable, not much of a plot, but it gives you a laugh or two. Too Many Girls, kind of ironic because that was the story of their marriage. Too Many Girls on the side. The marriage. Lucy and Desi elope. November 1940. Lucy didn't think the marriage would last more than 2 months. Why? Because Lucy was busy doing movies, doing radio, and Desi had his band, and they never saw each other. And then Desi would go into the army. Ball files for divorce from Desi in 1944 due to the rumors of drinking and infidelity, but they soon reconciled. Some of the B movies that she was in included The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert. They would have something else in common besides both being on CBS and on the TV show, Green Acres and Here's Lucy show in the 1960s on CBS. They were both maybe communist sympathizers, which would not be a good thing after 1946. But she was a player. She was a player in Hollywood, never a big star, but constant work. She was in a whole bunch of comedy films, including her husband's affairs. Maybe the title might have been a little sensitive because Desi was supposedly having affairs. Miss Grant Takes Richmond. with William Holden, who, by the way, dated Verita, who you saw there before. The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert, and two Bob Hope movies, Sorrowful Jones and Fancy Pants. So in August, they changed up a little bit the touch, just a little bit, like right here, because it was the 40th anniversary of MTV, and MTV in 1981 started with in August of 1981, August 1st, with the video. Did television kill the radio star? So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll let you answer it in the chat box if you want, and I'll give you a couple seconds. Did television kill this radio star? Yes or no? Give me a couple seconds there. Okay, we got one in chat. Let's see. No, no. Anybody else? We got 2 no's. We got 3 no's. 3 no's. Did television kill the radio star? All right, so let's answer that. Whether television did kill the radio star. It did, and here's how. My Favorite Husband was a one-time special on CBS, July 5th, 1948. In fact, it was never supposed to be on the air. It was a test show. CBS had a new series called Our Miss Brooks that was supposed to be on July 5th, 1948, but it never materialized. So CBS is looking to fill that little radio was before TV, yes. So CBS is looking to fill that gap that week, and so they have the show on the shelf that they're testing out, and they figure, you know what, we have, if it bombs, nobody's going to ever care. Nobody ever really will hear it. But who that? Let's put it on. We'll see, because like I said, if it bombs, nobody will care. Well, My Favorite Husband doesn't bomb. Lucille Ball and Lee Bowman play the characters of Liz and George Cugat, not Cooper. It would become Cooper when the show becomes regular a couple of weeks later. And there's a positive response to the broadcast, and CBS says, hey, you know what? Let's launch My Favorite Husband as a series. Now, Lee Bowman was not available to do the series. So when it debuts later in July 1948, Lucille Ball and Richard Denning are the leads. And suddenly, this show becomes really popular. And suddenly, Lucille Ball becomes a star. And there she is. She's 37 years old. Remember, she's been knocking around now for 20 years without anything that approximates anything as a regular gig. This is her first regular gig. And all she's doing is reading off a script. Lucille Ball, Richard Denning. The show was written by Jess Oppenheimer. The stars align. Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, Bob Carroll Jr. The writers are integral to Lucy's radio success. All of them, with the exception of Denning, would move to that new medium, TV. Meanwhile, CBS notices, and they got this overnight star who's actually been out there for the last 20 years and is sort of a known quantity. My Favorite Husband, 2 people who live together and like it. My Favorite Husband was the first radio series to star motion picture musical comedy performer, notice comedy performer, Lucille Ball, and her co-star. On the CBS comedy show was Richard Denning. Ball and Denning were Liz and George Cooper, a happy couple who would get themselves into all kinds of domestic scraps. Now, if you take a look at the sponsor, Jell-O. Jell-O was supposed to go to television with Lucy. The guy with the music, Wilbur Hatch, because the old radio shows were in the studio, and you came, you watched the show, and then there was a little dance music afterwards, and you went up and danced on the stage. Same thing happened on the TV show. And they had best friends, the Attenberrys, and one of them is Gail Gordon, who would be with Lucy until the end, literally in the 1980s. And the other is Bea Benaderet, who was supposed to be Ethel Mertz. CBS, after 2 years of seeing this show being wildly popular on radio, and also Lucy becoming a star, says, How would you like to do a television program? This is 1950, and of course she jumps at the chance. Except, except there are some strings attached, major strings attached, which almost dooms the television show and Lucy's career. The demands. Well, Lucy's now a star in radio. She's a star in radio and television, not quite yet. You got Uncle Milty, right? He's the first real star of television, Uncle Milty. But that's about it. And also the other thing with television, there weren't that many televisions out there. It was confined to the big cities, mostly on the East Coast. Los Angeles had 7 TV stations at the time, but San Francisco didn't. But Lucy is now playing hardball based on her experiences over 22 years in the business where she had to scrap and fight for everything. And so she has no leverage other than, she's got this radio show, which is good, but she has no leverage really for TV. So her first requirement is that Desi Arnaz, a Cuban, play her husband on television, possibly save the marriage. CBS executives, no, can't do it. CBS and the potential sponsor, Jell-O, thought that the American public would never accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York. Is there an agent here? No, Lucy seems to be her own agent. There probably was an agent, but Lucy's making the demands. CBS and Jell-O say, hey, ain't broke, don't fix it. You got a wildly popular radio show with Richard Denning. Keep it. It's not broken. Jell-O decides they're going to drop out, and Philip Morris, the cigarette company, decides, well, let's look at this. And of course, Lucy wants to save the marriage, so working together is what she wants. And yes, they were married. They were married for 10 years at this point, and here's where it gets really sticky. Lucy tells CBS, yeah, both of us or neither, and eventually CBS conceded, although the networks had a lot of doubt since Desi was a Cuban exile. Remember, he's thrown out of the country with his family in 1933, and he has this thick, strong Cuban accent. And one other thing. Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple, and that is a problem. Because in 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes becomes president of the United States and the Civil Rights Movement ends. And yeah, they were legally married. They were legally married. Interracial marriage, though, in 1950 was illegal in parts of the U.S. In fact, in 17 states, interracial marriage was illegal in the United States in 1950. So you get the picture why CBS is worried and why Jell-O was worried. America's civil rights movement stalled since 1875. Desegregation was in the South ended with the Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel J. Tilden presidential race in 1876, which seemed to be too close to call, and the party leaders decided to get together and work out a deal. This might have been a stolen election, but they work out a deal. Hayes, a Republican, becomes the president of the United States after the Democrats cut a deal with the Republicans. The Democrats in the South said, get the federal troops out of South Carolina, get them out of Louisiana, and give up the civil rights stuff. And you could have the Oval Office. We'll give it to Rutherford B. Hayes, but you do what we want, you can have the Oval Office. And that's what happened. Interracial marriage was illegal at that point in more than a dozen states. So Lucy and Desi decide, hey, we're going to go on tour. We're going to show the American public that we can be believable as a husband and wife, even though they were a husband and wife and apparently good friends. Just their marriage was kind of on the rocks all the time, although they were best buddies. And so they go out on this tour, and here they're doing the skit Cuban Pete, which was in one of the I Love Lucy episodes, and people enjoyed them. They liked them, and the whole thing about the interracial marriage, nobody really thought about it. So they're successful in the summer of 1950. They perform before the live audiences, and CBS is, okay, it looks okay. Yeah, let's try it. And then here comes another demand. We're going to do the show. we're going to do the show. We're going to put up our own money, which must have made Bill Paley happy because he didn't have to put up $5,000 from CBS because Paley was always worried about money over at CBS. He had been the chairman of CBS, came up with the idea of CBS back in 1927, starting with a radio station in Philadelphia called WCAU, 1210 on your dial. So they decide they are going to produce this pilot with $5,000 of their own money, which now would be about $55,000. Here comes some more demands, and Lucy's making these demands. We want to film before a live audience. Oh, okay, that's okay, because most of the stuff that we do, most of it in New York, some in Chicago, it's all done before a live audience. So yeah, okay. Oh, film, that's a lot of money because we do kinescopes where we just aim the camera at the television screen and then just bicycle the show out to other people if they're not connected by microwave or connections. Yeah, okay. What else do you want? Oh, you want Carl Freud to be the cinematographer? Yeah, that's okay. Wait a minute. You're going to do the show in Los Angeles, not New York? You can't do that. You can't do that. It's got to be in New York and Chicago, and because that's where all of our microwave connections are, and also our coaxial cable connections are. They're connected New York to Chicago, to Philadelphia, to Washington, to Baltimore, to Boston. You can't do it in Los Angeles. There's no connection. Although in 1951, AT&T provided connections from the West Coast back. But when they were negotiating the show, it wasn't available. They said, you can't do it. And she said, well, then you don't have us. But they filmed the show. They pick up the cost of the show. And I Love Lucy was one of the pioneering shows for its use of multiple simultaneously filming cameras in a live studio audience. And it was shot on 35 millimeter film, which means it would be preserved rather than broadcast live and looking kind of grim on kinescope. And you've seen the kinescope stuff. Faces are stretched, blacks are exaggerated, the color on the show, and it's kind of choppy. I Love Lucy is not kind of choppy. Groucho with Featherman, who's the best second banana ever on a quiz show, although that really wasn't a quiz show, it was a Groucho show, better than Margaret Dumont. Anyway, Groucho, You Bet Your Life. How'd you like to edit down those shows with Groucho? You Bet Your Life was on film along with Your Showtime and the Stu Irwin Show, and Life of Riley with William Bendix. Jerry Fairbanks developed and was using multiple camera film production for television in 1950, the year before Desi, who was in charge of the filming, started what he was doing. You Bet Your Life used multiple camera film setup before a live studio audience the year before Lucy started. Lucy had bounced around for a very, very long time. And you know what? She knew talent. Lucy took a gamble on playing hardball. She's 39 years old at this point. Kind of, for a woman, that's kind of old, even in the early days of TV. So she really gambled in terms of playing hardball. And but she knew talent. And she wanted Desi because she thought Desi would be the perfect foil for her. Desi did have good comedic timing, had an expressive face, offered just the right amount of fluster as the husband Ricky, and hey, he mispronounced and Latinized words, Lucy, splain, and that added to the comedy. Within 4 months of its debut back in 1951, Lucy was the #1 show in New York, and a national audience soon followed. Oh, it's a smash hit. And why is it a smash hit? Well, there are some elements to the show. It's a multi-layered show. It's Ricky and Lucy being married, but it's Lucy and Ethel and their relationship, which in some ways is more important than the relationship between Desi and Lucy, because Lucy has all of these schemes that she wants to get in the showbiz, a woman's liberation type scheme. You know, I want to be equal on stage, right? Or at least get me on stage. And Ethel is there to make sure that Lucy's dream comes true and Yeah, I'm not sure about the Fred Mertz character. I guess he was friendly with Ricky, but yeah, I've always wondered how you could be friends with your landlord. And not only that, they're a different generation. Well, at least William Frawley playing Fred's of a different generation. But here they are. They got a smash hit on their hands, and they should be going for another 5 or 6 years. They were doing 39 shows a week. So eventually they're going to burn out, whether it's going to be 3 years or 4 years. You got to figure they're going to burn out because how many storylines can you do? So it all looks great going into the second season. It's a smash hit. Lucy is making money. She's the #1 moneymaker on the CBS network and also for Philip Morris by this point. So everything should be great, right? Well, as other things in Lucy's life, she hits another roadblock. CBS is happy. They have a smash hit. Lucy and Desi agree to pay for the increase in production costs provided that they, not CBS, own the rights to the film. And this turns out to be a brilliant business move, particularly the next season. No one at the time thought anybody would ever watch a rerun. It's just not happening. There were no reruns on radio, and how many times could you go back to the movie theater to see the same movie? That was the thinking back in those days. So the deal, Desi and Lucy received the ownership rights to I Love Lucy, and they took a $1,000 per episode each pay cut. But they hit the brick wall. Pregnancy is a TV problem in 1952. 1952, pregnancy is a problem. Lucy and Desi almost ended I Love Lucy after they found out she was going to have a second baby. This is 1952 America, and it was considered too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV. Television had censorship. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant. Well, there is the showrunner, one of the writers, Jess Oppenheimer. He actually ran the show in terms of writing and all that other stuff. And he's looking admiringly at Lucy, who's looking admiringly at him. And there's the expressive face of Desi Arnaz. This was the breakup party for the season. So long till August, Desi and Lucy. And he being Oppenheimer, comes up with a suggestion. He says, let's write this pregnancy thing into the script. Let's do that. And there's a problem. Well, this is what they said. A visibly pregnant woman had never appeared on stage or television before, so this is a big risk for all concerned. Lucy, Desi, Oppenheimer from the creative end, and CBS, the network and the show sponsor, Philip Morris. They're all worried about Lucy being pregnant, having forgotten. Maybe there's a reason that they forgot about the Mary Kay and Johnny show because it was on Dumont. Nobody ever saw the Dumont TV network, but Mary Kay Stevens was pregnant with a kid in 1948. The kid would become part of the TV show in 1949. And, oh yeah, she also slept in the same bed as her husband, which was a big thing because TV was following, except for Dumont, obviously, following the Hays Code, or what was called the Code. And you couldn't have a married couple sleeping in the same bed in the movies, and they had the same thing in TV. If you ever notice, it was separate beds. If you ever notice, if somebody was sitting on the bed, one foot was on the floor and one foot was on the bed. Who knows why? That was what TV was doing. The storyline worked. CBS allowed Lucy to appear on screen during her pregnancy, and some of the scripts did address the topic. However, the executives at CBS, looking at America at this point, said, don't overdo it. Just do the minimum because we don't want to cause too much of a stir. Well, there they are, Lucy and Desi. They've survived. They've survived crisis number 2. According to Lucy, in the early fall, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did several shows, 7 shows, concerning my pregnancy. These films were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possible violation of good taste. It was a CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. Now, I was doing this talk up for the Rise Seniors back in October. Yeah, I think it was the Welcome Back luncheon after COVID. And so they wanted to start off with Lucy. And there was a woman who was bilingual, who grew up bilingual, English and Spanish, and she said to me that they did use the word pregnant in when Ricky was talking in Spanish during the show. So she said they got around that in Spanish because the censors were only worried about English. So a priest, a minister, and a rabbi, they go into a room and they watch a show. The three-man religious committee half doth protest. We got to be biblical here, right? Half doth protest. What's wrong? We're pregnant. They were hardly in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. And oh, by the way, she also wore the pants in the family. There was a thing on TV: women couldn't wear slacks or pants. In fact, it got Carl Reiner and Mary Tyler Moore in trouble in 1961 on the Dick Van Dyke Show when she wore capri pants. She just didn't wear pants as a woman on TV. During I Love Lucy's second season, 1952-53, when she was pregnant, she couldn't do the entire 39-episode production schedule, so she would miss a program here and there. At that point, you just showed the program once. Nobody thought that anybody would watch a show a second time, and that creates a problem. But Oppenheimer and Desi come up with an unusual idea. We got 39 shows sitting collecting dust on the shelf. Why don't we dust one or two of them off and we'll just throw them in there? Let's see what happens. Rebroadcast some of the episodes from the first season. Besides, because of the way the FCC froze television license in 1948, and all of a sudden they freed up frequencies in 1952, there were more stations on. And the people who missed the show last year in cities that didn't have TV, like, well, let's say Austin, Texas, they might see the show for the first time. It was called syndication, and it worked. Desilu went on to invent the concept of the rerun and used the profits from the I Love Lucy show syndication to grow the fund, or to fund the growth of their studio. Lucy and Desi were television's first millionaires, the first. Neither one of them had any degree in business, but they somehow succeeded. School of Hard Knocks. Oh, about the pregnancy. On January 20th, 1953, there's Dick Nixon's down there. He's getting sworn in as vice president. Here's Dwight Eisenhower taking the oath of office, becoming the 34th president of the United States. Herbert Hoover, who presided over the Depression as president, looking on as well. So what happened in ratings? Well, the ratings kind of like comparing apples and oranges in a way, because Eisenhower gets sworn in at noon on January 20th. That's a Tuesday. And the Lucy show where she gives birth is January 19th, 1953, a Monday night. Oh, she gets 44 million Americans to watch the show. Ike gets 29 million, or 15 million less. Apparently, the audience was far more sophisticated than the TV executives. They accepted Lucy being pregnant. TV executives, advertisers, So here comes another roadblock. They survived the pregnancy. They survived the interracial marriage. This one is a big problem, a huge problem, because people did not survive in terms of being accused of being a communist. In fact, the biopic that came out, Being the Ricardos, Aaron Sorkin did that. It came out in December. He didn't know about this story. Looking for commies, registered red in 36, Lucille Starr denies she voted commie. But they got the affidavit of registration, 1936, Lucille Ball. I intend to affiliate at the ensuing primary election with the Communist Party. 1936, 17 years earlier, all because of her father. Fighting communism. There was something called red channels back in those days, and red channels outed people who they thought were communists. Americans don't patronize Reds. You can drive the Reds out of television, radio, and Hollywood. This track will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films, made by Red producers, directors, writers, and stars, are being used by Moscow in Asia, Africa, and the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftily glorify Marxism. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't Groucho, Chico, Harpo, and sometimes Zeppo glorify Marxism in films back in the 1930s? Well, I think they're talking about Karl Marx and others like Engels in Marxism. I think that's what they were referring to, not Groucho. Marxism, UNESCO, and One Worldism. And via your TV set, they are being piped into your living room and poisoning the minds of your children under your very eyes. Some of you were those children. Were you poisoned? So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, stars, and studios, you are aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you are helping Moscow and the internationalists destroy America. The Red Scare, the blacklist, involved the practice of denying employment to entertainment industry professionals believed to be or have been communists or sympathizers. Not just actors, but screenwriters, directors, musicians. Leonard Bernstein, Pete Seeger, two musicians, and other American entertainment professionals were barred from work by the studios. Here are some examples. I don't know how many of you remember Pert Kelton, unless you're Jackie Gleason junkies, from both the 50s and the 1960s. In 1951, Pert Kelton was the original Alice Cramden in the Honeymooners comedy sketches on the Dumont Television Network's Cavalcade of Stars. She was abruptly dropped from her role because she was blacklisted and replaced by Audrey Meadows. Rather than acknowledge she was blacklisted, Gleason and the producers explained that her departure was based on alleged heart problems. Gleason would rehire her in the mid-1960s when he did a reboot of the Honeymooners on the American Screen Magazine feature, whatever it was back on that show. In the 60s on CBS, she played the role of Alice Cramden's mother, the mother-in-law. Hazel Scott. Hazel Scott was Cafe Society piano player, great piano player in New York. She gets a television show. She is the first person of color to host a TV show. Don't know if you could call her African American because she was born in the English colony of Jamaica, but she was an actress. She was a great piano player, married to Adam Clayton Powell, the third, the congressman, and she gets her own TV show on Dumont, 1950. But that would come to an abrupt end after a few months. She is named in red channels, the pamphlet that listed the supposed communist sympathizers. She chose to testify before the House on Un-American Activities Committee to defend herself. Big mistake. The sponsors drop her, and then Dumont drops her after the sponsors ditch her in September of 1950. Philip Loeb was the co-star of The Goldbergs, allegedly the first situation comedy on TV, although Mary Kay and Johnny may have been the first. In 1955, Philip Loeb checked himself into the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan under a false name, took a fatal overdose of sleeping pills. He had a problem child, schizophrenic, couldn't take care of the kid anymore, was out of work. Gertrude Berg tried to slip him money. In fact, that show was off the air for a year after this all came out about Loeb. He couldn't find work anymore after 1951. 6 years earlier, he was the co-star of the first situation comedy, The Goldbergs, created by Gertrude Berg. McCarthyism and blackballing. This is the life that Lucy was about ready to face. On September 4th, 1953, Lucille Ball gave voluntary testimony to an investigator for the House on Un-American Activities Committee. It was our grandfather, Fred Hunt, just wanted us to. and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way, as I recall, I didn't. J. Edgar Hoover, it has been said, was a big fan of I Love Lucy. No word on whether he watched it with Clyde Tolson or not. Probably did. They did everything together. That may have saved Lucy from being blacklisted. Lucy swore to the House committee she had never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for room in the garage to organize with his friends. In her autobiography, she observed in herself a strong conservative with a Puritan streak and proclaimed, "I'm the most conservative member of my family." It was for her grandfather, a progressive and a free thinker, as she said, that she registered as a communist. Now, saving Desilu. This is 1953, September of 1953. Lucy with a drink and a cigarette in her hand. And take a look at Desi, that expressive face. He may be having flashbacks of 1933 and the sergeant's revolt in Cuba, where he was kicked out of Cuba and ended up in Miami. Before the filming of episode 68 of I Love Lucy, entitled The Girls Go Into Business, Desi performed his usual studio warm-up. He was the comedian. If you've gone to, say, comedy shows or game shows, they usually have a comedian that warms up the audience. Ray Combs, who was on Family Feud, was the comedian that warmed up the Johnny Carson show back in the 1970s. And they also tell you the do's and don'ts of being in the studio. You can do this, but don't do that. Look at the signs when it says applause or laughter, whatever else. That's your job. So Arnaz addresses the accusation doing the warm-up, and he reuses the line in Heather Hopper's column. Heather Hopper was she was a major factor in newspapers. I'm not sure why. She was a former actress who became a gossip columnist. She and Walter Winchell, Ed Sullivan. Gossip columnists had a big role in newspapers and had some clout for whatever reason from the turn of the century into even the 1960s or 70s. Rona Barrett, you might remember, being a gossip columnist and ended up on the Tomorrow Show with Tom Snyder. And he used the line that Heather Hopper used in her column. The only thing red about Lucy is her hair, and even that's not legitimate. Heather Hopper and Lucy were buddies. And you can see she started out as a brunette doing radio on CBS. The only thing red, shortly after Ball signed with MGM in the early 1940s, the studio hairstylist Sidney Gilroth changed the comedian's hair color from brown to red. 1943 film, DeBarry Was a Lady debuted her hair to movie audiences and earned Ball the nickname Technicolor Tessie. I'm sure it was not an interview, rather a nickname sure to make her look better. But she was not a natural redhead. I worked for a guy by the name of Selig Adler back in 1978, 79 after college. I was in the with a newspaper called the Rockland Roundup. I think that's what it was called. And anyway, so I'm working for him. It was one of these $11 per column stories. And Selig came out of the confidential world. I'll give you an example. I would go to East Ramapo school board meeting, and Georgette Hyde was the president of the school board, and she had been a Holocaust survivor. And no nonsense. It was typical school board. And, there was nothing there. Nothing funny about it. Nobody cracked any jokes or anything like that. And nobody dressed up, really dressed up. And he would say, "Well, what was she dressed as?" I said, "She's just wearing whatever, pants and a shirt." 55-year-old woman or something like that. And he'd say, "Well, was the sweater low cut?" I said, "No." "Was she wearing high heels?" "No." It's going on and on and on. So that's my brush with Confidential. But Confidential was a magazine that went after dirt and had people on payrolls that could give dirt to the magazine. And somehow they skirted libel laws because of this. And I'll give you an example. Confidential magazine. Desi Arnaz was cheating on his wife, Lucille Ball, according to Confidential in 1955. I knew Desi was inviting me for more than a drink, said the babe. It was a story from the 1940s when Arnaz and Ball were indeed separated. Oh, the babe quoted in the article was a prostitute on Confidential's payroll. They paid her. It was still both safe and lucrative to run a story entitled "Does Desi Really Love Lucy?" And in the Salkind film, they put all of this together like happening over in 1 week, right? It was a tough gig. Lucy caught colds, had crying spells, broke 2 fingers, sprayed her ankle 3 times, pulled a tendon, sweated off 19 pounds. She came down with a virus, went on hiatus. She recovered at the beach. She fainted on stage another time. The production company set up an oxygen tank for her in the wings, and she fainted again. By 1956, the strain, everything that went around the show was getting to Lucy and Desi, and also you're up to about 150 scripts. How many different stories can you come up with? It's getting to be tough on the writers also to keep in character and to continue to come up with scripts. The business of I Love Lucy. And I Love Lucy changes television. CBS bought the rights to the previously shown I Love Lucy programs for $5 million to rebroadcast them in 1957. The rerun industry was born. With that money, Desi and Lucy would purchase the RKO studio lot where she bombed out in 1937-38 in Hollywood to film other shows. Desilu filmed in Hollywood. The Desilu Productions lot in Culver City would be the outdoor setting for several films and numerous television shows, including Make Room for Daddy, The Andy Griffith Show, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, Star Trek, That Girl, and many, many more. Oh, My Favorite Husband. Well, the radio show ends in 1951 because television did kill the radio star, and Lucy becomes this bigger-than-life television star. She failed in the movies, failed in radio until 1948 when she became a star, but not the star that she would become on TV. And so CBS decides to revive My Favorite Husband in 1953. And it stars Joan Caulfield and Barry Nelson as Liz and George Cooper. The television show runs 2.5 seasons from September 53 to December 55, and it was produced in the same studio that today brings you The Price is Right, and from the Bob Barker studio, and Let's Make a Deal from the Bob Barker studio, and The Cortlandt Show at Night, and some soap operas. It's now this area, which used to be next to the farmers market, is surrounded by this ritzy upscale mall that I go to when I see my friends in LA. And I said, we got to go there because I have to see how the studio is doing. Anyway, so they do it 2 years there. And then Desilu takes the show for the last season, and it's filmed at that lot. So Lucy and Desi are making money off of My Favorite Husband. But they've had it by 1957. They would have an occasional show after that. Desi's done because of health reasons with a half-hour situation comedy format. He turns down the deal along with Lucy. They would get $80,000 an episode. Do the math here. $80,000 an episode plus $30,000 a repeat. 1957. 80,000 times 39 is about about $3.1 million. And then 13 weeks of reruns. Yeah, it's about what, $3.9 million, right? Something like that. So. Okay, so no, can't be
3.2.
I messed it up. 13, it'd be 460,000. So it'd be over $3.5 million for another season. They said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, Ford's coming out with the Edsel at this point, and they're spending tons of money on TV, tons and tons and tons of money on TV. And they go to Lucy and Desi, said, 5 one-hour shows, here's $2.5 million, take it or leave it. They took it, and they do 5 more Lucy and Desi shows, the hour show. They had other shows that were on, the Southern Show and the Untouchables. Lucy was, not partially, very responsible for moving most of the television production industry from New York to Los Angeles. What was left behind in New York were game shows, and also news shows. And there was an occasional show done here and there out of New York, but for the most part, it moved out to Los Angeles because of Lucy for the most part, and there was nothing left in Chicago. And there was stuff in Washington, but that was for news. Another show was the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, and that runs between 58 and 60. 2 years, 48 episodes, and two of them would become pilots. One for The Twilight Zone, and the other 2 episodes for The Untouchables. Lucy would make her quote unquote debut as a producer, but she was a producer. It's her company, with a 1959 episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Rod Serling. Rod Serling's an interesting character because Rod Serling goes to Desi and Lucy, or they go to him and they say, let's do something for the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. And he does. It's called The Time Element, stars William Bendix, and gets positive reviews. CBS is ready to talk to him about it, bypassing Lucy and Desi. And they like the show and say, hey, can you do this on a weekly basis? Sure. So Serling's concept for a science fiction fantasy anthology series is picked up by CBS. It's called The Twilight Zone, debuted in fall of 1959. You got Lucy, in part, to credit for The Twilight Zone. These are The Untouchables, and there is Robert Stack, Three from the Left, based on Eliot Ness's book. Eliot Ness may have made up some of the stuff in the book. Seems too good to be true, doesn't it? Anyway, so The Untouchables becomes a two-parter on the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Paul Monish adopted the 1957 memoirs of the Treasury agent, the G-Man, Eliot Ness, who's played by Robert Stack. CBS is not interested in the show, but ABC, which has money now. It's not a full network, but has money now because of the Mickey Mouse Club and also American Bandstand, 2 afternoon shows, make ABC tons of money. And they begin to buy shows for the evening, and one of the shows is The Untouchables. It becomes a hit in 1959. By 1960, Lucy and Desi have had it as a married couple. She files for divorce in 1960, charges Desi with extreme cruelty and subjecting her to grievous mental suffering. I've tried so hard to be fair and solve our problems. Now I find it impossible to go on. But the split was amicable. They remained very good friends. In fact, better friends after they got divorced, and business partners. And Desi comes up with an idea. We got to get some money into the company. Lucy, let's do another show. And so they're going to do another show. Desilu was on the ropes because Ann Southern, well, that's gone. Angel and Guestwood Ho, that's gone. They got The Untouchables. That's kind of shaky because the Italian Anti-Defamation League basically told Lucy and Desi, not every Italian commits a crime. Maybe you should lay off those names. And they did. And when they laid off the Italian names, the show lost popularity. So it's on shaky ground. So Desi says, hey, let's do this sitcom. Let's get CBS. Let's go to CBS. We'll pump some money back into Desilu, and it'll be good. CBS says, nah, not interested. Lucy says, am I still making you money off the old shows? Yeah. Well, I think you should be interested in the show. All right, what do you want? Okay. You know what? Vivian Vance is going to be cast. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, she's going to be the first divorced woman on TV, and I'm going to be a widow, rather. What? I'm Lucy. Who are you talking to? Yeah, I want my old Monday night time slot back. I want that Monday night time slot back. No. Who are you talking to? Well, they were on. There's the sidekick, Vivian Vance. In 1962, Desi wants to get out. He's having problems with Lucy's new husband, who's one of the writers of the show, and says, no. Gary Morton is his name, former Borscht Belt comic. So, buy me out. Lucy says, okay. She gives Desi $2.5 million, about $25 million today for his 350 shares of stock. She's the boss. She is the boss. November 1962, Desi resigns as president. Lucy becomes the president, the first woman to head a major studio, one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, and also the Globe. And this is before Betty Friedan's feminine mystique and the start of the women's liberation movement. Lucy does it. She breaks the glass ceiling. There's no mention ever of women's liberation. And the hair is still red. Why? CBS, why I bring that up, CBS was reluctant to push color transmission of its shows, so it had the ability to film in color. In fact, Peter Carl Goldmark invented color TV in 1940. And this is 1963, 23 years later, and the FCC said, go ahead, do the color stuff around 1951, 52, and they did do a color show, only for affiliates. Came out of New York for Baltimore, Washington, Boston, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. They got color TV, one color TV show. During 1963-64, she filmed her episodes in color. Even though CBS continued to broadcast the shows in black and white until September 65, the last Beatles appearance on the Sullivan Show, Ed Sullivan Show, was in black and white in 1965. Lucy came up with this thought, hey, the series is going to end at some point, maybe sooner than later, and let's do it in color because those episodes would command more money when sold in syndication. She also came up with this, which was great for an 8-year-old me in 1964, Fractured Flickers, which took characters out of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show and made its own show out of it, like Snidely Whiplash and Sherman and Peabody and Dudley Do-Right, and Fractured Fairy Tales, narrated by Edward Horton. And that came about 1964. The people that Desi and Lucy hired, well, they're still there, and she took their advice for the most part. She relied on them except for one idea. Mission Impossible, or the director said, do it? Yeah, we'll do it. During her time as the sole owner of Desilu, they developed series such as Mission Impossible and Mannix and Star Trek. And they were great shows. Where no woman has ever gone before. Where no woman has ever gone before. Star Trek. Lucille Ball had 2 proposals, one for Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek and another for Mission Impossible. It was clear Star Trek's pilot would be expensive to film. It was called The Cage, and it bombed. Ball actually thought that initially that the show was about traveling USO performers and told her board of directors, I'm not listening to you. I like it. Let's do it. Gene Roddenberry told Lucy and friends, this is Wagon Train to the Stars. He wrote on Wagon Train. Network TV people, uninterested. Desilu's board of directors, uninterested. Lucy, let's do it. NBC says of the pilot, we don't want it, except we like this guy, Mr. Spock, Leonard Nimoy. Build a show around him. They did. They did. Board of directors said, can't do it, Lucy, it's going to bankrupt us. Lucy said, who's the boss? And the rest is history. She sells out to Engulf and Devour, Gulf and Western in 1967, which also acquired Paramount Pictures around the same time. It renamed Paramount Television, or was renamed Paramount Television. Today it's CBS Television Studios. They have a piece of Jeopardy and a piece of Wheel of Fortune. It's Paramount Plus TV. You probably heard of the streaming service. She has a new production company in 1968, Lucille Ball Productions. Here's Lucy came out that year, runs to 1974, a few years of success, and she's done in 1974. She tries movies and bombs out again. She's the assistant professor, Lucille Ball, in 1977, teaching an 8-week class as an adjunct professor on comedy at Cal State Northridge in the Los Angeles area. Northridge was the place that the earthquake hit many years ago, 30 years ago or so. But Lucy still has the production company, Lucy and Tom Cruise. They put out a movie called All the Right Moves. It's produced by Lucille Ball Productions. She's the co-executive producer, along with her second husband, Gary Morton, and Philip Goldfarb and Stephen Deutsch. The movie, which was successful, is about a high school football player, Tom Cruise, looking for a college scholarship playing football. The goal, to avoid ending up like his father and brother in the steel mills. Well, Lucy told Barbara Walters, I'll know when to get off the stage. A guy in New Rochelle once told me the same thing. You might have heard of him. Robert Merrill lived in New Rochelle. We were friendly. Yeah, he's a lot older than me, but somehow we were friendly. And he said to me, "What's the difference between me and Sinatra?" I said, "I don't know, $1 billion." He said, "Besides that." I said, "Well, then what?" He said, "I knew when to get off the stage." Lucy did not know when to get off the stage. On September 20th, 1986, Life with Lucy would premiere on ABC. It lasted 8 shows. ABC ordered 13. Her last appearance was in 1989 at the age of 77, not quite 78, at the Academy Awards. She would pass away a couple months later from heart problems. I love Lucy, and so does CBS. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in business. In the 1950s and 60s, she was the artistic head of Desilu. I Love Lucy is still making money for CBS more than 64 years after its final show. In 2012, the then CBS president, Leslie Moonves, said the show was making the company $20 million annually. That's the last time they talked about it. Well, we're not done yet. As you know, Being the Ricardos came out in December and on Amazon Prime. I guess it's on video on demand, Being the Ricardos. The 2021 biopic took place allegedly over a course of a week during the production of I Love Lucy, which saw Lucy and Desi encountered a crisis, actually, it's 3 crises in one that could jeopardize their careers and marriage. She's pregnant, accused of being a communist. Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem star. The biopic was written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. Sorkin allegedly had no idea Lucy was accused of being a communist when he started to work on the picture. Now there's one coming out this year too. Amy Poehler is directing a documentary feature for Ron Howard's Imagine Documentaries and White Horse Pictures. Actually, Ron is now selling it. That just came out that he's selling Imagine Documentaries and White Horse Pictures on Lucy and Desi, the title for a film about the personal and professional partnership between Lucy and Desi. The film will be screened at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, as part of the Sundance schedule. And there was one more that came out last year, Sirius XM Radio. Let's Talk to Lucy. It was a CBS radio show done in 64, 65. Her daughter found the old tapes, put away, preserved. The new show, built from recordings of conversations with some of the biggest names in Hollywood history. There are 240 episodes featuring people like Frank Sinatra, a very young Barbra Streisand, who was about 23 at the time, her buddy Carol Burnett, who she told, don't do a situation comedy, do a variety show, and Bob Hope. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me. If you have any questions, any comments, feel free, because the floor is yours. And I'm going to stop the video here and the screen sharing. I want to thank Kate and Tracy at the library. Thank you for being here, and thank everybody who is going to who has watched this on video on demand. So I'm going to stop the recording. My name is Evan Weiner. Thank you so much.